The Apostle Peter is probably my favorite of all the Bible characters, because I feel like his life represents our lives on this earth. We don't know much about the post-Bible life of Peter, other than what church historians have said. The Catholic Church recognizes Peter as the founding father. They recognize him as the first pope. Our early church historians tell us about the death of Peter. They say Josephus and Clement and the others, they talk about that Peter was crucified upside down because he didn't feel like that he had the honor to be killed the same way that Jesus did. We know about his life through the scriptures. And it all starts on the shores of the Sea of Galilee as Jesus was passing by in a small little town of Bethsaida. He sees two brothers, Peter and Andrew. And Jesus calls out to them, "Drop your nets and come follow me." Now these two young boys heard that call and they dropped everything they had, and Peter followed him. We know that Peter was married, that he had a wife, and his mother-in-law was sick, and Jesus went and he healed his mother-in-law. And Peter was with Jesus day in and day out. He was there when Jesus fed the 5,000. And then Jesus sent the disciples out on the boat by themselves. And as they're out on the boat, the storms are raging around them. And they look out and they see something walking on the water. It's Jesus. And they're screaming out and they say, "It's a ghost." First thing that comes into my mind when I see somebody walking on the water is not, "It's a ghost," but that's where they're at. And Jesus says, "Don't worry, it's me." And Peter speaks up and says, "Jesus, if it is you, command me to come out to you." And Jesus says, "Come on." And Peter climbs up out of the boat and he walks on the water. I can't imagine what was going through his mind at this moment, or imagine what was going through the minds of the disciples as they saw this happen. And he's walking, but then the waves start coming up higher and the wind starts howling, and he starts looking around and he takes his eyes off of Jesus, and he starts to freak out. And then he starts to sink. And just before he goes under, Jesus reaches down, pulls him up, and the first thing Jesus says to him is, "Why did you doubt?" That's a gut punch. I can't imagine the guilt he was feeling at that moment. Man, I had the courage to tell him to command me to come out on the water, but then as soon as things got rough, I dropped. And one day their disciples and Jesus are sitting at the headwaters of the Jordan River at a place called Caesarea Philippi, just beneath the gates of hell, a sacrificial place for pagans and false gods. And Jesus is sitting there with the disciples as the water's flowing. He says, "Who do people say that I am?" And the disciples speak up. We don't know which ones were saying what, but some say you're Elijah, some say you're a prophet, some say you're John, but some say you're a crazy man, you're a lunatic, some say you're the Messiah, whatever. And then Jesus looked at the disciples and said, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter speaks up and says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus then says, "It wasn't by man that you learned this, or it was revealed to you, as by my Father, the Lord God." And he revealed this to you. And it is on that statement that I am going to build my church. And Peter, you are the rock. You are the founder. One day Jesus was taking his disciples up into a mountainside. And he left them all behind except for Peter and James and John. And he takes the disciples, those three, up with him, and all of a sudden they see Moses and Elijah surrounding Jesus, and a great light shines around them. And Peter looks at him and says, "It is so good that we're here to see this, that Moses and Elijah are here. I don't know how they knew it was Moses and Elijah. In my mind, they've got the little name tag that says, hello, my name is Moses. Hello, my name is Elijah. Somehow these guys knew it was Moses and Elijah, even though they had been dead long before these guys were around, and there was no photographs of these guys. But they knew it. And he said, it's so good that we're here to see this. Let's build a tent for Elijah and Moses. Let's honor them and celebrate them. And then a great light shined around them, and a cloud covered them up. And God spoke and said, this is my son who I love. Listen to him. Peter thinks he's going to do this great proclamation about honoring Elijah and Moses. And God says, hey, dum-dum, Jesus, listen. And there come time to the Passover, and they're sitting in the upper room, Jesus and his disciples, and Jesus bends down and he starts to wash the feet of the disciples, a job that was for the lowest of the lows. And Jesus is washing the feet, and when he comes to Peter, he says, you ain't washing my feet. And Jesus said, well, I'll tell you this much, if I don't wash your feet, you have nothing to do with me. And Peter said, well, then wash my hands and my head too. And Jesus says, no, you idiot. You don't need a bath, but you got to be clean. And then as they're sitting there, they've had the Lord's Supper, they've broken bread, and Jesus says, one of y'all is going to betray me. One of y'all is going to leave me. It's going to be high time for you to cut and run. And Peter speaks up and says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I am yours. You called me, and I'm going to be with you by your side. Jesus says, Peter, I tell you this much, buddy. Before the rooster crows tonight, you're going to deny me 3 times. And they left, and they went off to pray. Jesus up on the Garden of Gethsemane. And he took, again, Peter and James and John. He said, I'm going to go up a little further, and I want you to stay here, and I want you to keep watch and to pray. And Jesus goes up on the mountainside, and he prays to God, and he comes down. And they're asleep. He said, I told you to keep watch and to pray. And he goes off again and does the same thing. He comes back, and again they're asleep. And 2 times he does this. He says, boys, let's go. The time has come. My accuser is here. And they go down, and Judas gives Jesus a kiss on the cheek. And the soldiers say, we're here to arrest Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus says, I am he. And they go to siege Jesus, and Peter reaches into his sword and slices off an ear of one of the soldiers. He's ready to fight. And Jesus picks up the ear and puts it back on his guy's head. And Peter says, and he says to Peter, put your sword away. We're not here to fight. You're only getting in the way. I have a thing I have to do, and you're trying to stop it. Get behind me. They take Jesus in there and put him on this false trial, and the disciples are all there and they're witnessing it, and Peter's in the courtyards 3 different times. An old man, a young girl, and a group of people, they say, you're one of his. And 3 times Peter says, I don't know this man. And then he hears the rooster crows, and he once again feels so guilty because Jesus told him. And he was bold. I'm not going to deny you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. You are my king. When the going got tough, he tucked tail and run. And Jesus was resurrected from the grave. And when he sends word, he says, tell Peter, I want to talk to him. Peter struggled so much through life. He had his ups and he had his downs. He had these moments where he made bold proclamations. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. I will never leave you. But time after time, Peter failed miserably. One day the disciples were out on a boat fishing because they were all fishermen. And Jesus had left. So they went back to the lifestyle they knew, and they're out there fishing. And as they're coming to the shore, they see a man up on the shore that's got a little fire and he's cooking breakfast. And he hollers out, "Have you caught anything?" And the disciples say, "That's Jesus." And Peter takes off his outer garment and jumps into the water and swims to get to Jesus. By the time he gets there, the boat's already pulled to shore. But he was so excited to see the Lord Jesus. And Peter and Jesus go off onto their own for a little bit after they've had breakfast. Fish for breakfast doesn't sound appealing to me, but apparently I'm out of the loop on what's cool to eat these days. Jesus asked Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" He says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He says, "Then feed my lambs." Jesus again asks him, "Peter, do you love me?" He says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He says, "Tend to my sheep." Then the third time, Jesus looked at him and said, "Peter, do you love me?" And at this point, Peter is ticked off. "I've made all these proclamations. I've told you all these things. I followed you through thick and thin, and I'm here now, and I love you." And Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." You see, I said at the beginning that I love Peter because it's an illustration of us. The constant ups and downs and the valleys and the peaks and then looking great at one moment and failing miserably the next. And it's a great illustration of us because we are the same way. But this story isn't about Peter. This story isn't about us. It's about Jesus. The life of Peter, the biography of Peter, isn't about Peter. It's about who Jesus is and how Jesus views Peter and how Jesus views us. You see, Jesus looked at Peter the moment when he was saying, "I don't know that man," the same way he viewed him when he said, "Put down your nets and come follow me." Jesus viewed Peter when he took his eyes off him in the Sea of Galilee and began to sink and fall short. He viewed him at that moment the same way he did when Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said, "You are the rock of this church. You are the leader." You see, we go through ups and downs. We go through peaks and valleys. We have moments where we're high on life, and we have moments where we are down and deep and dark and depressed because life gets to us. We change moment by moment. We go through the struggles, and it gets to us. And sometimes we fail. Sometimes we deny. Sometimes we walk away. But according to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change. Lamentations chapter 3, verse 22 through 23 read like this. "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercy never comes to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." You see, we can mess up this world as much as we want. We can mess up our lives as often as we can, and we do on a daily basis. But the love that He has for us never changes. What we have to do in life is realize that every day we are going to mess up. We are going to deny. We are going to get in the way of Jesus and His plan. We are going to fail miserably. But that doesn't change how God views us. That doesn't change how Jesus views us. He has called us to be His children. He has called us to have the faith to put down our nets. He has called us to have the faith to make a proclamation in public of who He is. He has called us to be the leaders here on this earth. He has called us to be like Peter in Acts chapter 2, where he boldly proclaimed, people of Jerusalem, listen to me. You see, even though we're all full of failures and faults, he has a reason and a rhyme and a love for us that can never be changed, and he has a purpose. But the best thing about him is that there is nothing, according to Romans chapter 12, that can separate us from the love of Christ. Great is your faithfulness. Remember that. Have a great week.